All right, welcome everyone to this Q&A. Again, want to welcome to this Q&A. Question came in earlier, and the question was: does a man have to get married under the laws of Torah? So I'll ask in general: does the person have to be married, man or woman? And second part of the question is: if that is true, and you have to get married, what level of authority does a woman have? So it's a good question. So, from the man's perspective, first of all, there is an obligation for a man to get married, and that stems from the command in Genesis to be fruitful and multiply. All right, Genesis uh, um, chapter 1, verse 28. Now, the primary goal, certainly, of marriage is to have children. That's more on a man than a woman. Woman doesn't have an obligation necessarily to get married, and speak about that. And have children, well, she's going to one that's going to bear children because men can't do it, right? Still, men are never going to be able to bear children. Nonetheless, she helps him in doing that, right? So therefore, she also doesn't have an obligation necessarily to have kids. But we'll get there. So, in that sense, man has no obligation to be married, right? That is true. It's also important, let's say, for companionship and intimacy. Genesis chapter 2, verse 18 tells me not good for man to be alone. Now, what does that mean? We're talking about a person who is incomplete, right? They have one part of the soul. They're let's say better. They're half a soul, right? In order to be a complete person, you got to be married, right? You have half a soul, right, so to speak. So therefore, there are a number of reasons why it's not good for man um, to be alone. But again, we're talking here in the spiritual sense, where a person is half a soul, and they have to find their other half of the soul. Also, what does marriage do? Certainly for a guy, focus on the life purpose and not looking for sexual gratification outside, right? Outside of marriage. Therefore, bad thoughts, other things. A person's married, it's easier, right? It's only easier to overcome, these type of things. And therefore, it is brought down that really a guy should be married by the age of 20. By Hasidim, that a lot of times that is the case. They get married younger. They definitely get married younger, but today I would say most guys, in the bigger scheme of things, get married probably in the early 20s, probably 20, usually 22, 23, right? It could be 24, depending on a number of factors. A woman get married younger, probably the age of 20, 21. I mean, someone get married at the age of 18, but so that is one thing. Now, the other issue is, so for a man, or we'll speak about a woman in a second, but for a man, it's an absolute obligation. Even, let's say he's older, let's say he's much older, right? Still should be, let's say his wife died, whatever, should also, try and get married as well. As we said before, not good to be alone, even if you're older. Now, there are certain exceptions. There are certain exceptions, which probably don't apply today. And that is that if a person is totally dedicated to learning Torah, like you take somebody, as the Gemara says, like Ben Azai, right? Ben Azai didn't get married, right? If a person, and again, this wouldn't apply today, but in general, if a person would be so dedicated to Torah, that they can remain single without his natural inclination overcoming them and leading to sin, i.e., it's like he's married to God, in a sense, right? No other issues, but it's going to take away from his learning, right? And that's what he does all day long, right? He learns. Then you can have a case, again, it's not going to apply today, but you could have a case where you have someone that is highly exceptional, you're talking about someone on a very, very high spiritual level, right? So in this case, right, he's so dedicated to Torah that he can remain single without his natural inclination overcoming them. Now, for most people today, it's not possible, right? And this is exception. This is, not common at all, right? People get married, right? That is a general, as great as a person is in spiritual terms, as much Torah as they know. They get married. Everybody gets married, right? It's not a encouraged path to go down, in this case. Yeah, so that wouldn't apply, right? That essentially, would not apply for the simple reason that, a person's evil inclination is very strong. So their evil inclination, hormones go wild. Understandable. So if they're married, obviously it's easier, right? In different ways. But, for someone to stay single, for a long period of time, it's very hard. Now, what do you do if you're not married? Let's say you didn't meet the right person yet. You're already 20s, you're in your 30s already, or maybe older. Okay. Yeah, so it's also a big test. It's also a huge test. Not that you don't want to get married. Right? They want to get married. They want to have kids. Yeah, but they haven't met the right person. So yeah. So the inclination is going to be very strong on them, but it doesn't matter. Some person has to control themselves either way. Right? But we're talking about a case here where someone's so married to Torah, yeah, they feel they can't get married. Now, what if, let's say, they have a strong inclination, a guy, let's say, has a strong inclination for men. Now, he's not going to act on it, let's say, not going to act on it, but he feels he can't be with a woman. He feels whatever. He doesn't have attraction to women, but he's religious. He doesn't want to be gay. Yeah, but he's religious. Okay. So in that case, it's better for him not to get married, for sure. Yeah, he's going to keep the Torah mitzvahs. He's not going to do anything he shouldn't do, but he has a certain inclination. Yeah, but he's not going to act on it, right? He's not going to act on it. Okay. Now, for somebody like that, unless, someone can help them over this, someone like that should not get married. And they're not going to transgress over here. I mean, it is a major command to get married and have kids. So, there's no question. But if a person feels they're not capable, they can't be with a woman, let's say, okay, God's not going to throw the book at them, right? They're not acting on the other side, okay. But there are some people like that. I mean, probably very few that are not actually going to act on it. But in that case, they wouldn't be obligated. It'd be forbidden for them to get married, right? Let's say. All right, that's by men. Yeah, that is by men. So what about women? What about women? Does a woman have an obligation to get married? Now, she doesn't have an obligation to have kids, even though she's the one that's going to bear kids, right? So it's still not going to happen with a guy, right? It'll never happen. Nonetheless, she's part of the mitzvah of being fruitful and multiply, right? As I said before, Genesis chapter 1, verse 28, she's part of that mitzvah. He can't do it without her, right? Can't have children without her, in general. But she doesn't have the same obligation. There is, I would say, a rabbinic obligation. Yeah, pretty strong rabbinic obligation. Yeah, for a woman to be married. And as Gemara says, better for her to be married than not married. But obviously, not just to be married to anyone. I mean, she didn't meet the right person, she didn't meet the right person. Yeah, but there is an issue. What's it going to prevent? What's it going to prevent? Suspicion, In propriety, why isn't she married? Right? Why isn't she married? Maybe she's with someone else. Maybe she's a mistress. I don't know. She committed adultery. Right? But a woman also, like a man, is also not good for her to be alone. In general. Yeah, she needs companionship, support, etc. Right? Again, she shouldn't get married just for the sake of getting married. Right? If it's not a good fit, it's not a good fit. But, it is brought down. It's better for her to be married for many reasons. Than not to be married. But she can't be married. She meet the right person. Okay. Now, she has the same obligation when we say in the Torah, in the third paragraph of the Shema, not to lo sasur acharei levavchem ve'acharei nechem. Do not go after your heart. Do not stray after your eyes. That applies both to men and women. Yeah. So for a woman also not to be alone, it's also good. Yeah, it's also not a good thing, right? Because again, it's temptation, other things, so to speak. So, technically speaking, is there an obligation for a woman to get married? No. And let's say she got divorced, bitter divorce, got widowed, no intention to remarry. Okay. Now, is the rabbinical court going to say you have to get married and have to have kids? If you could have kids or whatever, do you have to get married? Otherwise, you can't convert? No. Right? Now, they tell you that's a lie. Right? It's not true. It's a good thing. It's a good thing for a woman to be married. They're not married. Okay. Yeah, but, is that one of the things that they're going to say, well, if you don't get married with this amount of time, you can't convert. That's absurd. Right? That itself does not exist. Right? And again, and if anybody would tell you that, that's a lie. Right? I'll tell you straight out, it's a lie. Yeah. It doesn't make any sense. It's better. Again, it's better for her to be married, than not. But it has nothing to do with conversion. Right? It will have absolutely nothing to do with conversion. Right? And that being the case, question comes up. I do get the question a few different ways. One question will be, is there certain age limits? Right? Is there certain age limits, for a woman to get married? Like, if she's middle age, she's gonna have a harder time getting married. It's convert, probably. Right? I'm not gonna say it's gonna be easy. I've had middle-aged people get married. Yeah, even though they converted. But I would say that if someone says, they had a bad experience, whatever it is, they feel they can't be married or they don't want to be married, that's not going to kill a conversion. Right? That is not going, that is not something that is going to destroy their ability to convert. Yeah, I would say they're scarred from it. They don't want to get married. Yeah, they're scarred from it. Okay. Now again, the base that might try and encourage, right? Base that might try and encourage it, that's one thing. But they can't force them. Right? You can't say, well, this conversion is dependent on the fact whether you get, married or not. And that's one thing has nothing to do with the other. But again, the Gemara does say it is better for them to be married, right? Certainly, either from temptation, that's one example, right? Just like a guy, in different ways, and companionship. No one wants to be alone. Now, you have no choice. You don't meet anyone, whatever. Okay, right? But if someone says, you know what, I'm much happier being alone. Yeah, I'm married to myself. Okay. Yeah. I can tell me the Gemara says better to be married than not married. Okay. But again, it's not ma'akiv. It does not stop a person from converting. So that's one thing. And the second part of the question I want to deal with before I take any other questions is how much authority does a woman have? Yeah. It was a good question. Obviously, guy asking the question. Yeah, but anything, a lot of things in the house, right? That's her domain. Now, does that mean she's obligated to do everything, cook and clean and this and that? That's part of her domain. Now, If she's overwhelmed and needs help, should the husband help? Yes, 100%. Let's say he enjoys to cook, and she'll let him cook, not a problem. Yeah, comes to educating the kids, they have to be on the same page. Yeah, so it's not allowed to be taken advantage of, right? Certainly not. They have to be mutual decisions. I mean, she definitely has to say she's not just she's not just a slave, not just not just a maid, just the opposite, right? What does the Torah say? She's an Ezer Kenegdo. What does Ezer Kenegdo mean? A helpmate opposite you. Now, two people can be very similar, but what does it mean opposite you? So it means she's not a yes person, meaning she has what to say. She has what to say. Let's say it comes to finances. Yeah. She'll say, okay, if she says, I'll leave it all up to you. You're the one in charge. Okay. But she has an opinion. She for sure has an opinion. Yeah. Does that mean the husband has to say every last penny where it goes? No, not necessarily. Right? But again, any major decision, they have to make themselves. Right? They have to make together. So it's just a lot of power. Right? People look at it as like, well, all she does is have kids and cook and clean and do this. Well, that's part of her job. A man cannot have kids without a woman. Okay. But that doesn't mean he doesn't have to help out. That doesn't mean, well, the burden's all on her. Yeah. And usually a woman has to work also. Even if the husband's not learning, right? Both people have to work. So it's hard. Yeah. But a husband, has three obligations. He has three obligations when he gets married, when he signs k'tuba, when he signs that marriage document. He's got three obligations. One obligation is he has to clothe her, right? She has to have clothing, right? Just take care of that. Second thing is, you have to have a house. Now, it doesn't mean you have to own the house, right? But he has to give her a house, right? A place to live. And what's the third thing? It's conjugal relations, right? Now again, is the husband allowed to force himself on his wife? No. 100% forbidden. Yeah, 100% forbidden. So she has a lot of rights, right? Again, it's a mutual thing here. Definitely a mutual thing. Now, the majority of things that come up in the house, right? She's the one in charge in general. Yeah, if she doesn't function properly or, things aren't going a certain way or who knows what, okay. So husband can step in, there's no question. But that's pretty much her domain. Yeah. It doesn't mean the husband can't have a say. But that's one thing. The other thing is that these type of things, again, it's a mutual relationship. A mutual relationship in general means the other person has what to say. Right? You have discussion. It doesn't mean you necessarily agree on everything. Okay. You have to work things out. Or let's say it comes to educating kids or certain things, whatever, finances, other things, whatever it may be. Let's say you disagree. Let's say a very strong disagreement. Okay. So what do? Take the bull by the horns and just do what you want? Right? Or you speak to someone. Speak to a mentor, a rabbi, somebody, right? In order to figure out the situation, right? Not going to agree on everything, necessarily. Not necessarily, supposed to agree on everything. They come from different backgrounds, etc. So not going to see things, necessarily, necessarily the same. Okay, so that's what makes the world go round. Very good, but you have to have common ground here. What do you do when you disagree? So that means she's a person in the equation. You take her out of the equation and the husband just rules things with an iron fist, that's not going to be good. Because then what's the wife going to say? She says, I'm just here to cook and clean. I don't have to say anything, right? She could say that. It may be true. It may somewhat be true, but it's not right. It's certainly not good. Right? It's not going to be a good relationship, 100%. Right? So there's plenty of rights. But the thing is, if it's about divorce, he has to be the one, if they're going to get divorced, he has to be the one to give the bill of divorce. Now, Now, that comes because we're missing half a soul. The guy has a difficulty in committing, right? So he has to give her something under the canopy, right? Under the chuppah. And he has to say the magic formula, Harayat Mekudeshli, you are consecrated to me, i.e. to me and no one else. Kedas Moshe Yisrael, right? By a Jew, like the laws of Moses and Jewish people. Very good. Now, if he has the difficulty of committing, which a guy normally would, yeah. So since he's the one that makes the sanctification, literally makes the kedushin, yeah, he has to be the one to break it. Now, you could have a recalcitrant husband doesn't want to give a bill of divorce. Yeah, he wants to hold out for money, for other things, extortion. It's wrong, right? But she can't get married otherwise, right? Really, he can't get married either. But she can't get married. It's considered like an aguna, a chained woman. People say it's unfair and there's extortion. There are other things. Okay, it could be abused. It could be abused. But at the end of the day, the system works 99% of the time. Now, divorces are messy and whatever. So without, going so much, into that, one other thing is that the modern Orthodox community, or more than 30 years ago or more, they had a prenuptial agreement. Now, prenuptial agreement, not just about money per se, prenuptial agreement, they make an agreement where if God forbid they decide to split, the husband agrees to give a bill of divorce. In this rabbinical court or that rabbinical court or to wherever they choose. Now, the problem is the language itself, for the most part, the elder Orthodox community, is trying to come up with their own. I've been trying to do that for a while. The problem is it looks like it's forced. You can't force the person to give a get. You cannot force the man to give a bill of divorce. Now, the Rambam, the laws of divorce says, the Rambam holds that you can beat the guy to an inch of his life. You can cut off his bank account, do other things. You can basically beat him to an inch of his life to give a bill of divorce. Now, how's that work? Why does that work? That's a forced get. You can't do that. How are you allowed to do that? You're forcing his hand. He has to give it willingly. What does the Rambam say? He is giving it willingly. He just has an evil inclination. He's got a major evil inclination over here. Because of his major evil inclination, he doesn't want to give it. So that's not forced. Right? That's not considered forced. Now, in New York, there's a get law. And a lot of rabbis don't like. I don't think it's changed over the years. They don't like it because there are a number of things that the courts can do, secular courts can do, to, squeeze a person. Yeah, they cut off his credit card, cut off his bank account. They can freeze everything, freeze all his assets. Yeah. I mean, in theory, they can put him in jail also. Yeah. So, but what's the problem with any of these things? They force his hand. Yeah, forcing his hand, you can't do. In other words, if it's under duress, that's considered a forced bill of divorce. You can say, but what are you supposed to do? You try and convince him the best of your ability. Try and do things, that he's going to want to give, with a full heart. Now, in this case, the ones, who wrote this law, who put this in, said it's not forced. Again, because you hold like the Rambam. You're doing these things. He really wants to do the right thing. Everybody really wants to do the right thing. Yeah, but what happens? He's got an evil inclination. He's spiteful. You're going to give her a bill of divorce. Oh, it's like $150,000, $200,000. Yeah, you want to divorce me? Have someone pay it, and then I'll do it. Whatever, make all kinds of crazy stipulations, which is wrong. Which 100% is wrong. Now again, because the system is set up the way it is, and it's harder for the man to make the commitment, so he has to make the kedushin. If he's the one that has to make the kedushin, i.e. the sanctification, you're right, and to marry her, quote unquote, then he has to be the one to break it. Someone's gonna tell me, come on, you can abuse the system. Could. In theory, you could. Yeah. But in general, that should not be the case. Right? It should not be the case. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. Okay, but the point, without getting into that, the point is that that's what he's going to have to do. right? He has to give the bill of divorce. So the modern Orthodox community got rid of this problem, this potential problem, because they have a prenuptial agreement. Very good. So that forces the person's hands, but he's doing it willingly, right? So that he's not being forced. He's doing it willingly because he signed. He signed the document. They can enforce it, right? They can enforce it in the courts. Very good. Yeah, the other Orthodox community didn't like the wording of it. So they're still working on a wording where it'll be acceptable to them as also, and that will take care of the problem. That should take care of the problem. Well, it's an issue. I'm not going to say not, right? It's an issue. But otherwise, she has plenty of rights. It's interesting that, when you sign the ksuva, the marriage document, there are absolute obligations. A husband has to give to his wife. Absolute obligations. Doesn't say what she has to do. Doesn't say she has to bear him children. Doesn't say she has to bring in all the money. Doesn't say anything about her. He's got to take care of her needs. He's got to clothe her. Got to give her a house. Right? He's got to give her conjugal rights. Very good. Now, if she decides, she's going to work, that, they discuss, okay, where's the money going to go? Whatever. He's got an obligation to support her. Now, she could say, I don't want to be supported by you. I have my own money. So I'll live off my own money. You bring in whatever, and, she can say that. Also, technically, whatever money she makes should go to her husband. Right? That means she can't put some money aside, but should go to her husband. But in either case, she has absolute rights. She doesn't have no rights at all. Now, people will bring this up wrongly, and they'll say, see, women have no rights because look what happens, she can get abused. Okay. Yeah, but if you look in the bigger scheme of things, it's his fault. It's his fault. He should be doing what he needs to do. Yeah? And the system is set up in a way, again, he's got the difficulty to commit. So he has to make it, and because he has to make it, he has to break it. Okay. Now, can I get abused? I can get abused, but that doesn't mean she doesn't have rights. Right? That's a big mistake. Person will take one aspect, and what will they say? They say, see, she has no rights at all, I can divorce against her will. Very good. Yeah? He can hold out. So what? That means she has no rights at all? She can't do anything? He's got obligations. Yeah? If she decides, if she's considered a rebellious woman, what's considered a rebellious woman? One case, again, there are going to be a lot of questions here, so we'll get to them in a second. She could say, you know what, she could be, so disgusted with him and whatever bad habits he has and different things he's done. She can say, you know what, I'm not going to the mikveh. Now, if she says she's not going to the mikveh, obviously, he can't, pass anything to her. They can't be intimate together. They can't hold hands. They can't do anything. Yeah. Now, that's one aspect. One aspect where she's considered a rebellious woman. Now, if she's doing it to protect herself, if she's doing it for other reasons, maybe not. Depends. Right? Depends. But there are certain things a woman could do. Yeah, a woman could do that certain things she may lose. Right? I mean, they're pretty bad things. So it's not like, it's not like we're going to say, well, if you don't know how to cook, well, that's it, you're out. You burnt dinner tonight, you're out. Yeah? I mean, it's got to be something obviously substantial. It cannot be something, arbitrary, so to speak. On the other hand, if it is something substantial, yeah, this is, they're not going to say, or rabbinical court's not going to say, oh, because you won't go to the mikveh, you can divorce her. Okay, we'll let you get divorced. They're going to want to hear the story, like what's going on, etc. And they'll do what they can, to save the marriage, if possible. Do they go to therapy? Is therapy working? Or let's say one refuses to go, or whatever the case is. Yeah, if the marriage can be saved, they'll save it. There's an obligation to try and save it. if the marriage can't be saved. Okay, so divorce is on the books. So the first time I sat in Basin, very first time, you had parents, grandparents, and like on both sides. It was a messy, messy divorce case. Very messy divorce case. People yelling and screaming. I was like shell shocked by seeing all this. And so in the middle, they tell everyone to step outside. In a back door, right? In a back door, sounds like a good movie. In a back door comes in somebody, they call in somebody who's a marriage counselor, a marriage therapist, yeah. So they bring him in the back door. They don't know he's there. So they ask him a whole bunch of questions. First question is, can you help the situation? So he said, yes, but I have one major problem. He said, what's the problem? He said, I can help the situation, but he said, because the parents, the grandparents, and everyone and their mothers interfering, I can't help the case. It's destroying any semblance of unity whatsoever. He said, if no one would get involved, let me do my job, I can save the marriage. Yeah, there's a few other questions. Okay. Yeah. So not all marriages can be saved. Not all marriages should be saved. Yeah, there can be serious problems. Then you have to get divorced. Okay. But people say, but it's not on the books. Of course it's on the books. The Torah says very clear. The Torah says very clear. There's divorce. The Gemara says God sheds tears anytime there's a divorce, but it's on the books. 100% exists, it's on the books. Yeah, if you can't save the marriage, you can't save it. Yeah, not all marriages are supposed to be saved in general, right? But you do what you can. If it's possible, you try and save it. Marriage is sacred. You don't just, you don't throw out a spouse like like you're changing a t-shirt. Maybe like in the secular world, who knows what? What goes on. What goes on, so to speak. So it's sacred. You try and save it. If it can't be saved, what do you do? What do you do if it can't be saved? It can't be saved. Right? So women have plenty of rights. Within the scheme of what goes on in the house, and outside the house, they have what to say. It's not like a guy just runs, runs his house with an iron fist and she says nothing. Yeah. Comes to educating children, she's the one in charge from the beginning. When the kids are little. Okay, then they send the kids to school, whatever. You got a major role here. We don't, just have the children and stay barefoot pregnant in the kitchen. Like, come on. They don't have to be barefoot. They can wear sandals. I mean, shoes. Yeah, but that's a bad stereotype. It's an awful stereotype. That doesn't mean they don't have what to say, right? But again, within reason. Within it has to be mutually agreed upon. If you can't agree upon it, so then you have to go to an outside source to arbitrate. Yeah. Whether it's a mentor, whether it's a rabbi, somebody. You have to get someone, to arbitrate the case. To try and get to, make peace. And if peace can't be made, if peace can't be made, what do? Then you're going to make a decision. What's the person willing to live with? Can they live with this? If it's something you can't live with, that's it. What happens in a case, mention one other thing. What happens in a case where you have a woman who says, and this case came in also, this is a divorce case, and it was back and forth, this and that, but the woman says, Ma'usalai, this person is disgusting to me. Disgusting to me. Now again, it's not a flippant statement here. This woman doesn't want to be with this person, doesn't want to live in the same house. They are disgusting to me. That's called for divorce. Doesn't mean they have to get divorced. Yeah? But as if to say, I don't have anything to do with you, you're out. That's just like in the heat of an argument. This person's like, I am disgusted by it, I don't have anything to do with you. That's grounds for divorce. 100% grounds for divorce. Now, when they get divorced or not, it's a different issue. Right? That's a different issue. But that is grounds for divorce. You can't live together in such a situation. All right. Somebody asks. Let's do it. There's a man obligated to get married if his only choice is a Christian or a Muslim wife. First of all, I'm talking about Jews. Jews have an obligation to get married, no question. That there's no question. They can't marry a non-Jew, but if it's a non-Jew, now this question's come up. quite a bit. His only choice is a Christian or a Muslim. Yeah, if I want a non-Jew. So now, can he be married to either one? Technically, as a Noahide, he could. The other spouse is a practicing Christian or Muslim. They could stay married to them, right? They could. The issue is going to be, how strong is worship by them? And if you have kids, how do you raise them? Right? Kids are going to be the big issue. Now, if a person has kids and it's a question how to raise them, then you run into problems. Then the question is going to be, are you going to be able to stay married in such a case or not? Because some people will not want their kids raised as a Christian or a Buddhist but the problem's going to be, though, if you don't have custody, you don't have a choice. If the other spouse is going to raise them like that. Now, the other issue is that as a Noahide, and I got this question before, I don't know how the person got out of the problem, but the question was, as a Noahide, if you marry someone, let's say that's a Buddhist, or a Christian, they want to have a Christian or Buddhist service. That's a problem, right? That's idolatry. Now, under Islam, we don't hold that's idolatry. Some people, there is an opinion, again, I will throw it out there is an opinion that says it is idolatry. We don't hold that way, right? So if it's going through some sort of pagan ritual or something like that you can't do. That you cannot do. If you got married, let's say, by a justice of the peace, yeah, you don't have to do any of this. For a Noahide, you can just live together and that's it. You don't have to be formally married. Right, maybe it's better for tax purposes, whatever, but you don't have to, right, for a Noahide. Now, the question is, so if that's the case, you don't have a problem either way. If it's a case where the other spouse or potential spouse wants to have a religious service, that you run into problems. You certainly run into problems. So the only way out of it is either you don't have that formal service, you get married, in front of a justice of the peace or whatever, or a judge or whatever. Or you live together, you don't get married. Right? Now, if you do that, can you stay with them? And again, it's not forbidden for a Noahide to be married to them. The question's going to be, there will be conflict of interest, no question, if you go in different directions. Yeah, but I know somebody like that. They're happily married. She goes to church every Sunday. He doesn't, and whatever, and he's a Noahide, very good. They don't have kids they're raising. If they had kids they're raising, it's a much bigger issue. Much, much bigger issue. Yeah, so that's not going to be, if it's live and let live, and you're able, to live with how they want to raise the child, you don't have to get divorced. You can stay married. It's going to grind on a person, though. It's going to be very hard for that person to see their 3-year-old, 5-year-old, 7-year-old going to church and they don't believe in it. That's going to be a very hard thing. Yeah, but let's say you didn't have kids issues. Let's say. The only problem would be if they had any of these, if you got married and you have these rituals, whatever. But if you didn't, whatever, you got married by, I don't know, by a judge or by justice of the peace, whatever it may be, very good. Right? Can you stay married to them? You can stay married to them. Now, would it be better to be married to a Muslim? In theory, because they believe in one God. Yeah, they believe in one God. But again, even someone married to a Christian, is it forbidden? Not forbidden. It's definitely not forbidden. It's going to be hard to find someone who's a Noahide. Okay. Yeah. But again, if someone found someone, they're in love with and they're practicing Christian, you can get married to them. You can't get married in the church. Getting married and doing ritual like that is forbidden for sure. Right? But again, if you get married by justice of the peace or whatever, you can stay married. The only question is going to be by kids. Are you going to raise kids? That's a big issue. That's a big issue. So the second part of the question is, okay, if you're married to them, and let's say they're a Muslim and a Christian, you're bringing more into the world. I don't know if that's forbidden. That's not forbidden. There's a problem by a Jew if they're married to a mamzer. Right? A mamzer is somebody who comes from a forbidden relationship. So their children and their children's children, all the way down, they're going to be mamzer. Right? They're going to be mamzer. Now, if that's the case, having children, that's a problem. That's a definite problem because you're bringing these blemished souls into the world. And they can only marry someone of the same union. That's a problem. That's for sure a problem. Yeah, this, if they're going to raise them Christian or Muslim, that's not your problem. The issue would be for a Jew. That's why a Jew can't intermarry. That's one of the main reasons the Jew can't intermarry, because they're going to have the kids go after their idols. That's a problem for a Jew. It's not a problem for a non-Jew, right? It's not an issue. You can say, but I transgressed the prohibition of bringing, more Christians and Muslims into the world. That's not true. That's definitely not true. The question, first of all, you don't know that's the way they're going to go anyway, right? But even say it's going to be raised by the mother, Bible thumper or practicing Muslim, whatever. You say it's a very good chance they'll come out that way. Okay, it's no guarantee, but that's not your problem. That is not your problem. The problem would be, even if you have children and that's the way they're going to be raised, the problem is that a person will not be able to face it and see it. That's going to be a very hard thing. Not the fact that they have kids, right? If they have kids that practice no religion, would be better. Okay. Well, let's say a person's going to have kids, they know they're going to go one way or the other. There's not going to be no odds. They know they're going to be Christian or Muslim. First of all, again, it's not your problem if they do that, right? That's the first thing. But the second thing is, even if you do that, even if you have kids and that's the way they're going to go, and let's say 100% this is the way they're going to go, and you know that for the future. Okay. What's the problem? The problem is you didn't transgress. The problem is seeing it. That's the problem. You see it, and it makes your stomach churn, the fact that every week they go to church, they go to the mosque or whatever. Right? But you're not, technically, you're, a person is fathering that child, it's going to go in that direction. Right? You don't have a guarantee that's going in that direction. Well, let's say 100% going in that direction. That's not your fault. That's not your fault. I'll give you an example. Not exactly the same thing. Hiskiyahu Melech, doesn't want to have children because he saw his kid's going to be, evil and do idolatry and all that. And then he gets very sick. He's on his deathbed, right? He comes to the prophet. The prophet said, "What's going on?" What does the prophet tell him? He said, "Because you want to have kids." But he said, "I saw in the future. I saw in the future my kid's going to be evil. He's going to do idolatry and do very terrible things." So the prophet tells him, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. You have an obligation to have kids. Forget about the future. Forget about the future. So he marries the daughter of this prophet. That's what happened. That is essentially what happened. But he got punished with the death sentence. With the death sentence. Because even though he knew what the future was going to bring, he knew what the future was going to bring, he wanted to prevent himself from not having children for that reason. And what did God do? Almost killed him. They can tell me, okay, it's talking about someone much greater than us, someone much greater than we'll ever be in 10 lifetimes. Okay. That may be true. But the fact that he should have had children and he didn't, that was punishable for him. Even though we knew the future. So, there are no guarantees. The prophet says, we'll pray, we'll work hard with whatever, try and prevent it to the best of our ability. He said, otherwise you're going to die. That's what the prophet tells him. Otherwise you're going to die, for this sin. So he said, okay. So he made a promise he's going to get married. God healed him, and that's what happened. In the end, that's what happened. Right? But we don't make calculations based on, even if we know the future, which nobody does. But even if you would know the future, you would know you're going to have a grandchild or great-grandchild down the line. It's going to be one of the most wicked, disgusting people ever created. Even if you knew that, you still have an obligation to have kids. That doesn't stop you. Because anything can change. Right? Anything can change. And what if it doesn't? What if in this case it doesn't? Then the person becomes wicked Joe Schmo, whoever it is. And it's because you had the child. You had an obligation to have the child. That's what happened. Okay, it didn't change. That's what I would that's what I'd say on that. Is Rashi considered a prophet? No. Rashi is not a prophet. Is Rashi never wrong? There are plenty of places we don't hold like Rashi. Just like the other commentators. There's, Yeah, you got the Rambam, you got the Ramban, you got, very, very great people. Very, very great people. We're all like them all the time. Depending, what the case is. None of them are prophets, by the way. Yeah, some of them may have divine inspiration, maybe, which is a low form of prophecy. They're not prophets. No, the only prophets we know are the prophets that are canonized in the Torah. Those are the only prophets. No, other people can have a low level of prophecy, which is divine inspiration. You can have great rabbis, generation have that, but it's not prophecy. And it doesn't mean they're not infallible. Doesn't mean they can't make mistakes, right? Doesn't make mistakes either. Someone asks who the modern day group cannot convert or marry a Jew. Nobody. Anyone can convert, right? There was a decree. There was a decree made on Moabites. I don't know who Moab is today, right? That male Moabites can never convert. Amalek, people of Amalek can never convert, but nobody knows who they are today. All the nations have been mixed up, right? So there isn't anyone today that should not be able to convert. The person who cannot marry a Jew is a mamzer. A mamzer is a Jew that comes from a forbidden relationship. Normally, people translate it as a bastard child, like a child out of wedlock. Doesn't mean that. It means a forbidden relationship. Someone a Jew's not allowed to marry, right? Their child can only marry someone of that caliber. Of that, what do you call it? Of that union or a convert. Yeah. But that mamzer status, unless, well, it's not going to help them, but if they marry, let's say, a slave, today, I guess in Saudi Arabia, they still have slaves, right? If they would marry, let's say, a slave, and that child would not be a mamzer anymore, right? Otherwise, you have mamzerim throughout all the generations. There's no way to stop it, right? Even if a convert marries a mamzer, yeah. So it doesn't help the mamzer themselves. It helps the children, but it doesn't help the mamzer themselves. Yeah. Let me see other questions here. Somebody says, what would you say? Scientists would say they wouldn't be smallpox vaccines. Scientists would deny evolution and biology. I don't know what happened to them. There's still plenty of people who believe in evolution. I don't know why, but they still believe in evolution. Yeah, yeah. Let's say, you asked me something different. You're asking if they would say if there wouldn't be smallpox vaccines, or if scientists would deny human evolution and biology. It's kind of like saying, what was I did a parable in my head, just went out. Oh, someone once told me, it's not the same, but I'm going to use it as a parable anyway. Somebody says, well, I did the army. I fought in the Israeli army. Okay. And if it wasn't for me fighting the Israel army, Syria would come and invade. Egypt would come and invade. Now that's heresy. That's heresy. First of all, in the time of King David, you always needed an army. You always needed a standing army. Nobody denies that. Yeah? Well, where does God come in the picture? Where does God come in the picture? You need a standing army. You need people to sit and learn also to protect the army. Okay. Yeah. But so you might tell me, okay, it's not a similar thing. But in this case also, right, I would say it's somewhat similar because they can say, oh, if there would be smallpox vaccine, this and this would have happened. Yeah. Maybe there would have been a major plague. Yeah. And people would have died. Okay. Did God want them to die? I guess so. There's a measles epidemic here, in Israel right now. And they're young children dying. You know why they're dying? Because they didn't take a vaccine. Now, you can tell me the vaccine doesn't mean anything. Yeah. And God's killing them anyway, even if they would have had the vaccine. Now, the claim is, I don't know if it's true, right? I'll take their word for it. Yeah. Maybe I'm brainwashed also by all these other things. Yeah, that the majority of people, the majority of children that are dying because of measles, they're dying because they didn't take the vaccine. Now, a person can say it's a bunch of baloney, it's not the vaccine, it's not this. Okay. I can also say, even if they took the vaccine, yeah, we'll take it the other way. Even if they took the vaccine, couldn't they die? They could die, right? Now, I grew up, I got the measles vaccine. Most people got the measles vaccine, and, in the last 30 years, there was a measles, there were probably a few times, at least one I remember in the last 10 years, 15 years. There's a measles outbreak in New York, a few other places. And there was a problem because there were people that wouldn't vax. Yeah. So now the schools have a problem. The schools have a problem. Why do schools have a problem? Because they don't want to take kids that are not vaccinated. Yeah, with other kids that are vaccinated. Cause a whole problem. A whole problem. So there were kids out of school. There were kids out of school for weeks because of this. That the schools wouldn't take them. Can't leave the kid at home. What are you supposed to do? Yeah. So the head of the yeshiva of Lakewood contacted my Rabbi and asked him, what should we do? What should we do? There are people that will not vaccinate, but this is a danger. You can't let these kids go to school. It's a danger. What level of a danger is it? That was the question. Where you say they're not allowed to go. So he didn't want to get involved. He really didn't want to get involved, but one of the things he did say was that even in a case where it would be 1 in 1,000, in other words, let's say you had 5,000 kids in the school, and you have 3 kids, let's say that died, because of this. He said if it's 1 in 1,000, that's already a danger. That's what he said. He didn't want to answer, right? But he said 1 in 1,000 is already considered a danger, right? So if they're not going to be vaccinated, they can't come. It's a danger. It's potentially a danger. Forget about vaccines that work, they don't work, this and that. Yeah. Usually people who've had the measles vaccine, again, I can be brainwashed like everyone else, even though they've had the vaccine, most people are not going to get the measles. They're not going to get the measles. The vaccine worked. Now, if what they're saying here is true, let's just say, for argument's sake, we'll give them the benefit of the doubt, even though I don't have to, but we'll give them the benefit of the doubt. Yeah. 6, 7, 10 children that have died or more, they claim, and again, let's just say it's true, they claim it's because of the vaccine. They didn't take a vaccine. Now, you can say it's not the vaccine. You can say God's going to take them anyway, so he took them as a child, and this is how he took them. Okay. But if the vaccine works, let's say, if it works and this is the cause, that's negligence. Again, we can all be brainwashed by vaccines and all that. I know, they'll probably ban me on YouTube for saying it. But, at the end of the day, things happen not because of what people think. See, this is the mistake. If we would have this, whatever, this is going to happen. Who says? Who says that's the case? They're telling you that based on science and based on math and this and that. You know what? Could that change? It could change. Is that written in stone? No. Not written in stone. What they're going to say, if you wouldn't do this, you wouldn't have this vaccine, everyone's going to die. I don't know if everyone's going to die. Maybe a lot of people will because they're not protected. Okay. Well, you know what? They made a lot of statements about COVID, and the medical establishment was wrong. They didn't know what they were doing. Yeah. They were totally wrong. Okay. But even with that, people can make all kinds of claims does not mean it's true. So you ask me, what would you say if they say there wouldn't be a smallpox vaccine? Science is going to, deny human evolution of biology. So what? Well, my question, what's the connection? What is the connection? Evolution has not been proven. It's never been proven. Even among scientists, it hasn't been proven. Even if they're teaching it in academics, because the only, in academia, because the only other alternative to evolution is what? Is Genesis chapter 1, and they're not going to say that, so you have to come on evolution. Yeah, but so simple answer is who says evolution is true? And a lot of evidence to show it's not true. So you want to tell me, oh, what'd you answer them? Evolution isn't true. Yeah, there's a lot of proof to why evolution isn't true, right? So therefore, you can take your vaccine and stick it up your nose. Who cares? Oh, what are you going to say about evolution and biology? Well, I care about evolution and biology. Evolution and biology means zero, means less than zero. Yeah, we don't hold by evolution. Evolution's never been proven. So what I care, the vaccine doesn't go according to what they say. Who cares? Who cares doesn't go according to what they say? Yeah, there's no relevance because evolution doesn't matter. Evolution's not true, so I don't have to answer it. I don't have to answer it. Why? Because evolution isn't true. That's it. Well, you know it's not true. Oh, we got evidence. Plenty of scientists don't believe in evolution, so whatever they compare and say, oh, if it wouldn't be for this, what about evolution? Who cares? Who cares about evolution? That's irrelevant, right? Yeah. Someone ever says sometimes they say, yes, we'll do something else. Yeah. And it might be something else, and it'll deal with this and deal with that. Okay, but it doesn't have any relevance. It has no relevance. Yeah, because we're all by it. Right? If the thing isn't true, they're gonna tell me, oh, the vaccine and this and that. So what? The premise isn't true. If the premise isn't true, I don't have to answer it. I say the premise isn't true. Yeah. How many children does King Solomon have? Thousands. Yeah, probably thousands. What's the reason he had so many wives and concubines? Because he wanted to unite the world. Not just to get them from idolatry. That sort of led him astray, not literally. Not literally, but he didn't rebuke them, so it's as if he had a hand in it. But he did a lot of things for political reasons. Not you think King Solomon, the greatest, smartest of all people. Yeah, you think he was just out to fulfill his desires? He had all kinds of political things. Why he did it? That was the reason. It wasn't because of anything else. But he could have had thousands of kids. Yeah, but he had good reason to try and unite. Try and unite kingdoms and try and unite the world. If they're all connected, right? That was the main part of it. Let me see other questions here. 1 second. What you said a mamzer can convert. I said no. I said a mamzer. First of all, mamzer is a Jew, not a non-Jew. Second of all, a mamzer does not exist by a non-Jew. Let's make that very clear. Even if it's a forbidden relationship between two non-Jews, if they have a child, it's not a mamzer. It only applies to a Jew. So what we said was a mamzer, if it's a Jew, has a relationship with someone he's not allowed to be with, that person has a child. That child, who is called a mamzer, can only marry someone of a similar union, another mamzer or a convert. That's what we said. Someone here says 1 soldier for every scholar. That's not Torah law. You didn't have 1 soldier. You didn't have 1 for 1. Right? You had a standing army. No one disagrees. Even in the time of King David, you had a standing army. Right? But you had people sitting and learning. Right? Now, how many people, I'm not sure exactly the geographics here. Right? My assumption would be you would have more people fighting and less people learning. It's not 1 for 1. Certainly not 1 for 1. Yeah. Maybe it's 1 in 100. Maybe it's 10 in 1,000. I don't know. I don't know what the numbers are. Right? It's not gonna be 1 for 1. It's for sure not gonna be 1 for 1. They need the manpower. Yeah. Even if God's in charge and God is helping them, still need the manpower. So it's not gonna be 1 for 1. It's gonna be much higher than that. Much, much higher than that. You'll need many more soldiers, but you needed people sitting and learning. So let's say you had, I don't know, you send 5,000 soldiers to war. How many people are going to be learning? 50? 20? It's not going to be 1,000. Unless they think you only need 4,000. Yeah. But if they need the majority of people, it's not going to be a lot of people sitting and learning. But you're going to have people sitting and learning. You need both, there's no question. But the numbers of people who are going to be fighting are much greater. They're going to be much greater than people sitting and learning, that's for sure. Someone says homeopathic vacillation for those who are abstaining from. Okay, right? Again, if you want to talk about standard quote unquote vaccines, again, I don't want to get banned here. People can be against vaccines. Okay, again, what's the problem? A school is not going to take somebody if they go through that. The school is only going to take someone who's vaccinated. Now, if they're not vaccinated, they put a danger to other people. Yeah, they'll put a danger to other people. So that you can't have. Even if you have other solutions. Yeah, the school is going to go according to practical medicine, not going to homeopathy or anything else, even if it has validity, right? They're going to tell you beyond the shadow of a doubt, get vaccinated or you're out. That's it. No other system or situation is going to help. That's going to be the bottom line. Yeah, again, whether you believe in the vaccination, you don't believe in the vaccination. Yeah, you had thousands of kids. The problem was you had thousands of kids out of school. Thousands of kids out of school. So what do? They won't vaccinate. Okay. But you can't take them. It's considered a danger. As my Rabbi said, 1 in 1,000. That's a danger. You can't allow them to go to school. That's a danger. That's putting people's lives at risk. Right? So you're going to come up with all kinds of other solutions. That's not a vaccine. What's the school going to say? Right? If I were I'm head of the school board or whatever, I'd sit there like this and say, is it vaccination? No. Next. That's it. They're only going according to that. They're not going to use anything else in general. Yeah. If they show and they prove these things combat, the measles or the mumps or whatever, just as good as vaccination, and you get all this proof, okay, so maybe they'll listen to it. Maybe they should listen to it if they have the backing and the proof. Very good. Yeah, if that's the only thing you have this vaccination, basically eradicate the measles or eradicate these other things, whatever the disease is. And let's say that is the case, they're not going to go according to anything else. They're not going to listen to anything else. They're going to say it's a vaccination or nothing. That's what they're going to do. So if that's the case, you cannot have a dangerous situation, right? But what are you going to do? You got thousands of kids out of school. Good. That's why they came to my Rabbi and said, what do we do? You get strong elements that will not vaccinate. But the schools won't take their kids. You can't leave them at home. Very good. So what do? That's a problem. Right? That's a problem. Yeah. Again, even if we're all brainwashed, even in theory, we're all brainwashed about all these vaccines. Okay. Let's say none of them work. They're all placebos, but they happen to work. Okay. Yeah. In either case, that's what we have. So if that's the case, they're not going to look at anything else. I'm just saying, they're not going to, whether it's true or not, doesn't matter. Yeah, science is fickle, true. A lot of things have changed, yeah. But, if you, when I was growing up, there was no chickenpox vaccine. Yeah, back in the day, there was no chickenpox vaccine. Right? So doctor told me, they said, you didn't get it as a kid, try and get it from somebody, whatever. I didn't get it until, one of my kids had it. And I had all these spots, whatever. Went to the doctor, he's like, I got good news and bad news. Good news is, it's chickenpox. Bad news is, you got to be isolated for a week. Like, that was it. So I caught it, but it can be dangerous to get it, is it though? That's when we got the chickenpox, got in the stomach, it was a dangerous situation. Yeah, but there's no vaccine. When I was growing up, there's no vaccine. Yeah, I agree science is fickle, but again, if quote unquote you have a vaccine that's basically eradicated certain diseases, you're not going to convince people that it's not the vaccine. You can say God did it through this. Okay, but they're going to claim 100% the vaccine that did it. So if the vaccine that did it, whether it's right or wrong, that's it. They're not going to take anything else. They're not going to take anything else. In general. If it's true that there are other ways to do it, okay. If it's been proven, right? Again, I agree. Scientific community, it can be fickle. Okay. I'm not gonna disagree with that. It could be. Right? But at the end of the day, if you don't have like clear-cut proof that this thing works, just as good as the vaccine, they're not gonna listen to you. For better or for worse. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying that's what's gonna happen. Someone asked the book of the Zohar, secret parts of the Torah, or the Sod, i.e., what you call the hidden part of the Torah. Yeah, and Pardes, right? Pardes, Pshat, Drash, Remez, and Sod, right? Pshat, simple explanation. Drush is homiletic interpretation. Remez are hints. And Sod is things that are hidden. Yeah, is the book of Zohar a secret part? Yes. The Zohar is considered the secret part of Torah, what we call Sod. Are fossils less than 6,000 years old? They claim fossils are millions of years old. Yeah. Could they be less than that? Yeah. They could be. Right. One of the things with fossils in the age of the universe is that people will say, now a lot of people don't like this explanation, but couldn't God trick all of us and say, okay, this is how long the earth, we say the earth is 5,700, however many years, right? Whatever it is. You can say, but you got science says billions of years old. Billions of years old. So whatever, different ways to look at the age of the universe. Right? You read Genesis, the Big Bang, right? And Dr. Schroeder says it depends where you're standing in the universe. Right? One day, if you're sitting on Mars, could be, 100,000 years. Could be a million years. Right? So he holds it depends where you're standing. Scientifically, it depends where you're standing in the universe. Not a lot of people like that either. But some will say the age of the universe can only go by carbon dating. How long has carbon been in the universe? To prove it's only like 5,000 so many years, right? By doing that. Or you could say, which people really don't like this explanation, couldn't God have made the world look much older than it is? He could. Remember, what was God? It says, Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. God created the heaven and the earth. Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. What was he doing before? Well, he's the beginning, he's the end, right? There's nothing before or after him. Good. What was he doing before? Creating, destroying worlds. That's where you could say dinosaurs wars got destroyed. Yeah, in previous worlds. Okay, it could have been thousands of years, millions of years old. It's not a contradiction. Could have been a previous world. Okay. Not part of this world. So now you're asking, could a fossil be that long, but that old? It could be. Could be older, but it doesn't bother us. Doesn't bother us. Why? Because even if it's a billion years old, so what? Is it really a billion years old? Well, maybe it's only 5,000 years old. It just looks like it's a billion years old, according to science. Again, they don't like that answer, but there's different ways around the problem. Someone said, someone had 1,000 children. What's the reason I heard some Jews saying someone only had 3 children? Only 3 of them legitimate. I don't know. What does it matter? What does it matter anyway? Yeah. In other words, you're going to ask, okay, if he had 3 children that are like, are the most important children, right? They're the most important children going to inherit him and bring, Judaism in the next generation. Okay, so all the other ones, who cares? Who cares how many he had? Yeah. What did Abraham as children with Keturah? What did he give them? Nothing spiritual. He gave them, names of God, right? Names of God, he sent them to the east. That's why, so much sorcery and other things going on in the Far East, right? He said, well, I don't have anything to do with them. So they're not going to have anything to do with Judaism. And he gave them these names of God. It's a good question why he did it. But, let's say he didn't want to have, make sure they had no contact with, they're not going to have anything to do with Judaism or whatever. So what does that mean? It means he basically got rid of them. Didn't want to have any connection to them with Judaism at all. Right? And who's his main offspring? Is Isaac. Right? So that's not a contradiction there either. You can say, yeah, maybe he had 3 children, 4 children that really matter and passing down Torah to the next generation and all that and kingship and all that. Very good. And everyone else doesn't matter. There's background noise. Yeah. Yeah. You can have 3 children or 4 children, let's say, that are going to inherit him and make up who the Jewish people are going to be later in all the different kingdoms. Very good. What about everyone else? They're irrelevant. Right? They don't have any relevance. Maybe political relevance, but nothing more than that. Spiritual relevance, they will not have. They will not have. Why would you say to physicists that say nothing is something? God created the world from nothing, right? Yesh me'ayin. He created something from nothing. Yeah, you say prove it. Let's see what proof they have. They make a lot of statements. Does the proof of what they say stack up or not? That's what you got to see. Comes along Stephen Hawking in A Brief History of Time, and he comes up with this idea through physics and science, which Einstein agreed with, others agreed with. There is the universe is expanding. Now he proved that through science. Okay, he doesn't know how it's happening, right? He doesn't have an answer according to science how it's happened, but he's got proof, right? He's got proof mathematicians agree with, scientists agree with, physicists agree with, they all agree. He's got the proof. Very good. Okay. If he's got the proof, good. And if he doesn't have the proof, you have to see what the proof is, right? You have to see what the proof is. They make all kinds of statements. Is it true? How do we know it's true or not? It has to be scientifically evaluated. If it's evaluated according to science to be true, forget about whether we hold to science or not, it doesn't matter. They evaluate it to be true. You can say it's true. Doesn't mean they're not fallible, but you can say it's true. You have to look at the evidence. If their evidence doesn't hold up and there are all kinds of holes in it, and evolution, like evolution, let's say, and there are a lot of holes in it, no pun intended, bring me the proof. Show me the missing link, right? In the 1990s, early 2000s, the last claim they had of a missing link was a jawbone, a set of teeth. Show me the proof. You got proof, very good. You don't have proof? Yeah, it depends. Depends what the proof is. Yeah. So you have to see what the proof is and evaluate it. Somebody asks, okay, why can't women learn Zohar? Why should they learn Zohar? Doesn't apply to them, right? Let them learn what they need to learn. Men should be learning Zohar. Many men should be learning. You should be learning. Man can learn Zohar over the age of 40, right? But even over the age of 40, they have to have a tremendous amount of knowledge. Tremendous amount of Torah knowledge. Without Torah knowledge, forget about a woman, I'm talking about a guy. Without proper Torah knowledge, it's like learning calculus without algebra or trigonometry. You can't run until you learn how to walk or crawl, right? So you can't learn things that are more esoteric if you don't know the basics. Yeah, that's what I say about a man, all the more so about a woman, because the woman doesn't have an obligation to learn, and she's not going to know as much as the guy in general, right? So, but you have to be on a spiritual level also. But you can't start learning stuff in general for men or women, unless you're ready for it. Yeah. Nobody's going to study higher mathematics, i.e. calculus, without algebra, trigonometry. Try it. Go back to school and try it. It will not work. Why won't it work? Because you don't have the fundamentals. If you don't have the fundamentals, then it's not going to mean anything. You're not going to understand what you need to understand out of it. Now, there are people, I see these like super know-eyes that, claim to know about Zohar and different things. They don't know anything. Let me see, they've gone through a tractate of Talmud and they know it well, backwards and forwards. Then we might have a short discussion. Yeah? But this is the problem. Once you say it's forbidden, everyone wants to learn it. Right? I understand it's more esoteric. 100%, it gives much deeper meaning, to many things that we do. Okay. But again, you have to start from somewhere. You can't, a person who doesn't know the Aleph base cannot learn Kabbalah. Like, it's just, I think that's obvious. What about Madonna? Esther, she calls herself. She doesn't even know the Aleph base. So if you tell me someone's teaching her, it's like so watered down. I don't know why you would do this, but whatever. It's so watered down. You understand certain things. Okay. Imagine if you had a lot more knowledge. A lot more knowledge. That's different. But you have the spiritual, you have to be spiritual holding somewhere also. It's not just having the requisite knowledge. What is Zohar? Zohar is a book written by, we hold that's written by Shimon Bar Yochai. The Arizal revised the major commentary, the Lagon major commentary, explains the Torah on a very high, on a very deep level. Very, very deep level. Right? But you can't understand the depth of the level without knowledge. And you have to have a lot of knowledge. A lot of knowledge. You have to be holding somewhere spiritually also. Right? But explains a lot, a lot of things. There are different ways to interpret, as we said before. Pshat is a simple explanation. Remez are hints in the Torah. Drash is a homiletic interpretation. And Sod, which means the hidden elements of Torah. That's what the Zohar is, right? It's hidden things that are on a very, very deep level. Very, very deep level. The levels, the language is in Aramaic a lot harder than the Gemara itself. But whatever, you got to be holding somewhere in the world to understand what it is, right? A person can't just learn it if they don't know the alphabet. And if you do know the alphabet, there's a lot of knowledge a person has to have, right? Some people learn it like a medrash. They learn it. Forget about the Kabbalistic aspect. They learn it like, as a homiletic interpretation, without necessarily the Kabbalistic aspects. Okay. It's a very, very deep understanding of Torah. That's what it is. Isn't Zohar Kabbalistic? Yes, Jewish mysticism. That's what we call it. Right? Jewish mysticism. Don't people go seriously crazy from dabbling? Depends. It depends. Depends on the person. Depends who they're being taught by. Depends on a lot of things, yeah. If you're not ready for it, it could kill you, literally. It could drive you mad. Yeah. If you're not learning it the right way or doing things you shouldn't be doing. Yeah, it could be the kiss of death, but everyone wants to learn it. Because if you tell them they can't learn it, everyone wants to learn it. Yeah. In Aramaic, there's a word for no mean yes in Hebrew. No, not that I know of. In Aramaic, it means the same, I think. No means no and the same in Aramaic. Cain's a different word. Yes, I think it's a different word. In Aramaic, it's not the same in Hebrew. Yeah, let me just the dinosaurs live among humans. I don't know, it's before this world. We hold it's probably before this world. And even if it wasn't, they could have lived with humans. It's not a contradiction. That's not a contradiction. All right, I'm gonna stop here. I do this every Tuesday and Thursday. 2 o'clock Eastern time, 1 o'clock Eastern time, 5 o'clock Israel time. Anyone has any questions, find me on Facebook at Michael Kaufman, Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism, orthodoxconversion.com, Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism on YouTube. There I get videos, Q&As, Ethics for Fathers, Book of Leviticus. You want to send me an email, RabbiChaimKaufman@gmail.com, RBBIChaimCoffman at gmail.com.